there, my name is Olivia, and I'm here to talk to you about managing Suits teams. For a little bit of background on myself, I am currently a product manager at Microsoft, but my journey towards that role actually began with NASA Suits. I was a participant for 4 years when I was in college at Boise State University. I led our team for much of that time, and um, that was really one of the first experiences I had where I got my hands on making a software project from scratch and going through the whole cycle and process from kind of concepting that idea to testing it to um, iterating and building kind of an ongoing software team. So it's one of the things that really got me that hands-on experience in college and made me fall in love with and discover the product management role. So I'm really excited to kind of go back to that and talk to you about what we did on the team when I was involved with it, what worked well, and give you some tips to hopefully help you jumpstart your own Suits team. I joined Microsoft right after college, after completing a summer internship, and I've been there for 3.5 years. Currently, I'm working on Microsoft Excel and some of the AI products that we're adding to Excel, which is super interesting and exciting space to be working in. And I also just completed my master's degree. And I tell you all this experience because, while I sadly cannot be there in person today, my job had something last minute come up. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about whether it's about Suits or whether it's about working at Microsoft or any of this stuff. I always love to talk to people from Suits, and my LinkedIn bio is on the slide. Feel free to message me. So with that, I'll get into some of the tips that I have for managing Suits teams. So I won't get too into the weeds of the difference between product and project management. My role at Microsoft is a product manager, so it's a little bit different than what I was doing day to day for Suits. And if you're curious about that, send me a message. Happy to talk more about that. But what I'm going to talk about today for Suits teams is about how to lead the team to achieve all the goals that you have within the given constraints, which are time, expertise, resources. There's always kind of constraints in software projects that you have to really create a strategy and work around to create the most effective thing that you can. And that's what project management is about. So these are some of the topics that I'll go through, just kind of some high-level areas that were important when I was working on the team. There are lots of different ways that you can structure your team. I definitely think it's not a one-size-fits-all. This can really depend based on the amount of expertise that you have in your team, based on the amount of people that you have, how much time people have to devote to the team, stuff like that. So this slide just has kind of some examples of different roles that you might have. You might have developers. That will probably be one of the larger groups because ultimately you've got to create this thing and you're going to need a fair amount of people to get that done. But there are tons of other roles that are really important to being successful in the challenge. There's design. What is this going to look like? How is the interaction going to work? And that can be informed by research and UX testing, which can, these are all sort of fluid roles. Like, they don't have to be performed by different people. Again, it really depends on the expertise that you have and what people are willing to do. But you can have separate people, and it can be helpful to kind of separate out these things. There's, of course, social media and outreach as well, which can also, take some attention. And then there's usually some form of team lead. Whether you want to make the leadership more distributed is up to you. If you have just one person who's in charge of leading, or if you break the team into sub-teams and have sub-team leaders, that can work really well for bigger teams. So communication is one of the most important things in making these projects successful. Just a few tips to start off with. Again, there's not really any one size fits all kind of process for communication. Um, Different people communicate differently, so a lot of it is just kind of getting a read on the team, figuring out what works well for them, often asking them what works well for them, being curious and asking questions is a great start. And ultimately, delegating is as a team leader is really important. Um, you won't be able to get everything done by yourself. So it's great to have clear delegation of like, so people understand like I'm in charge of this area, and I'm gonna report back to X person, and create that structure so there aren't things that are just left in the open that nobody knows who's supposed to do. Also, when you break out the team into different disciplines like design and development, for example, it's really important to make sure that those disciplines communicate, because if, for example, the designers create a beautiful design but the developers don't know about it or they don't understand it, then that's not going to translate to the final product. And it's really important to make sure that that communication is continuously happening. For modes of communication, there's lots of different things that you can try. Our team always had a kind of a combination of offline and online communication channels where we would have meetings, which I'll talk more about later, but then we also had Discord or Slack or Trello, and it depended on the year. We tried different things. But having at least some online channel of communication is really helpful, so people can kind of work through and talk through things before there's necessarily a meeting. For returning teams, there's a whole added layer of complexity because you're not starting from scratch. You have something existing, and you have an existing team culture, existing knowledge, and making that kind of translate to the next year and even potentially years beyond that is a challenge in of itself. So things to think about when you're a returning team is how are you going to onboard new members? That can be sort of a case-by-case basis where you spend time with them and have them join the team and kind of get assimilated, but it can also be really helpful as teams get bigger if you create kind of documentation or videos or tutorials to help these new team members get on board and feel a little bit less overwhelmed without having to ask questions all the time. Although, of course, that person-to-person interaction is always going to be important and something that you want to have with new team members. Pair programming is really great and something that we did a lot in the first few years of the Boise State team, where we just sit with each other and code, and you learn so much when, especially you're a new person working with someone who's more experienced. For returning teams, there's also becomes questions of refactoring. If you created something in the previous challenge that maybe isn't scalable or is going to be difficult to maintain, it's worth reevaluating, like, is this something that we want to keep around, or do we want to rewrite it to be more high quality code? And that's really a trade-off, because refactoring takes time, and time is one thing that is not in abundance in the Suits challenge, or ever in software development, but especially for Suits when you have sort of less than one academic year to get your project done. So when you're thinking about those kinds of problems, really think about the cost and benefit of, like, if I'm refactoring the code, what am I getting out of it? Is it necessary for the goals that we want to achieve this year? And it absolutely can be. Like, creating sort of like hacky code really compounds and creates a time sink later if it's not easy to add new features to it. So it's really a thing to kind of evaluate case by case. I talked a little bit about documentation already. That's really important, especially if you're managing a team that's going to be working on this project over multiple years. People are going to forget things. Even over the summer, you forget things, and eventually you're going to graduate and you're not going to be there anymore. So getting things in writing and making sure that all of that is kind of in a shared, accessible location is a really way to kind of help the team scale beyond you. And that gets into the last bullet point. Ultimately, making systems that will outlive your time on the team, if you want it to be a really sustainable thing, is the way to go, because you can, as one person who's really passionate about the project, do a lot, and that's definitely the role that I found myself in a lot of the time. I had a lot of knowledge, I'd been on the team multiple years, and there was a lot of stuff I did for the team that nobody even realized that I did. And I learned that really, if I wanted the team to be able to continue beyond me, I needed to kind of put that into systems and documentation instead of just keep it all in my head. Otherwise, things were going to collapse when I wasn't around. As far as meetings, again, there's different ways that you can do this, and I think the best thing really depends on your team and also how many members there are on the team. We at Boise State started out with a small team. I think we had maybe 5 or 6 consistent members our first year, and then we scaled up to 10 or more members in some of our later years. And so our meeting cadence looked very different when we had a small team versus when we had a large team. And I'm sorry, you're probably hearing my work messages. This is the life of a PM, is endless messages. I'm gonna turn that off really quickly. Okay, we're back. So yeah, for Boise State, often, like when we had a smaller team, we would have usually one all-team meeting per week, and that would be more like status updates and outreach, just getting everybody on the same page about what our progress was and what we were doing. And then we'd also have working meetings because we found we were just a lot more productive when we were all together, developing together. So we'd also have one dev meeting per week that was a bit more freeform. We'd just kind of show up and work as long as everybody was available to work. In later years, when we had a design team, which was awesome, they also had their own meeting once per week, which was more consistent in the initial stage of the project when the design really needed some heavy work. And we'd have one-off meetings when deadlines were coming up and we needed to get stuff done as well. So that's one cadence that worked well for us. Our friends at Bradley University did something kind of different, where they had meetings weekly, but they used their meetings much more for work time. They just kind of had quick updates and then spent the rest of their meeting time for work, and also scheduled ad hoc work meetings. All right, now we're going to talk about my favorite topic, planning. So one of the things that I found really important when working on Suits was prioritization, and also in my job today, whenever you're working with software, because software takes time to make. Resources are always limited, whether that's development resources, time, money, and if you don't have a focused plan, it's really easy for things to kind of slip and not to have a complete product where everything works together. And so there are lots of great strategies for kind of managing that, and I want to talk about some of those. One of the top things is know what is your minimum viable product. And a minimum viable product is sort of the base, stripped down version of your software that works. It might not have all the bells and whistles, it might not have all the features that you want it to have, but it's going to be able to complete that EVA task. And that's ultimately what you want to focus on making first. Like before you spend a whole bunch of time on your big flashy feature or whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have something that completes that basic task that works end to end. And my recommendation is to really focus your team on getting that done before everything else. Ideally, you have that working version, that basic working version before the end of your development process, so that you can, at that point, have people use it, play around with it, see what's working and what's not, and that can kind of influence your development. So a good way to kind of work towards that MVP is to, whenever you set out your tasks for the team, create priorities for those tasks. And what we use at my job is we use numbers. You can kind of come up with your own labeling system if you want. But for us, P0 is like a drop everything, this needs to happen kind of thing. P1 would be things that are in our MVP, like it has to work. P2 is stuff that should get done. P3 is nice to haves, and P4 is stuff that would be cool, but we're probably not going to get to unless we just have engineers sitting around with extra time. So it really helps if you think through all the things that need to be done, and if you label them with those priorities in Trello or GitHub or however you're tracking your tasks, even just in a document, however you're doing it. And that can help to focus your team. And so when someone's picking up a new task, they know I should take the P1s or the P0s, whatever is the most highest priority task that's not yet being addressed. I think we've hit that third bullet point home. Focus on mission critical features first, and those are likely the features that will go into your MVP. And kind of related to that, scope creep is definitely a thing. This is a challenge that has a lot of different elements to it, and there's going to be a lot of different ideas and ways that you can make your software better. But you don't want to let those things distract you from getting that core functionality done. And then one of my big tips when it comes to prioritizing is if you come up to a wall, meaning if, and this is, unexpected things always happen in software development. That's very normal. You're always going to find that there are some tasks that maybe are taking longer than you expected them to, or they're more complex. They're going to require a lot, like some reworking or whatever it is, or you run into something that's technically maybe not possible that you thought was possible. And when those kinds of things happen, it's really easy for the team to kind of get laser focused and put on the blinders and just think about that problem and say, like, no matter how much time it takes, we got to figure out this problem. And I have kind of an example of that happening when I was working on a different team in college, kind of similar to the Suits team where we were making an app. And we were trying to, it was a mobile app, and we wanted to have JavaScript, like use a JavaScript game framework to have little mini games in the app. And my plan was that we were going to import that JavaScript framework into our mobile project, and we were going to make it work. And it theoretically should have worked. So I set my team up with sort of a like skeleton implementation that I had done and told them figure out how to implement the games with this. And we spent weeks on that. They just kept running into problems, like the touchscreen controls weren't working correctly because the framework wasn't really made to work with touchscreens, and it just seemed like it was a problem that we were never going to get past. And that wasn't something that we really were able to anticipate before we had tried it out. And for weeks and weeks, we were just focused on that problem. And then one of the developers comes up to me one day and says, what if we don't do it this way? What if instead we create an iframe in the app and we just host the games on a website, and we just essentially like have a point our iframe to the URL of the games, and we try it and it works and all of our problems are solved. And that was a moment where I realized that we could have kept banging our heads against that wall forever, and it might have taken us a year to finally get that framework to work the way that we needed it to. But when we stood back from the wall and we thought about it, we figured out a way just to go around the wall. that ended up getting us exactly the same behavior that we needed for much less work. So whenever you find yourself in those walls in software development, which you will, it's always good to stop back and think, like, is this the problem that I need to be solving? Because problem solving time is the most valuable resource that you have. And so you want to make sure that you are using your mental energy for the most impactful things. And if there are workarounds, if there are ways to move forward more quickly, then take those. Okay, that's that. Another way of kind of thinking about the MVP mindset is agile methodology, and this is something that it's really great to be familiar with if you aren't already. It's a very common framework that's used in industry for software development, and there's lots to agile methodology, but the core of it is basically breaking your projects down into different phases known as sprints. And when you are developing software in sprints, if you look at that picture on the slide, the idea is, instead of, like, if you're building a car, instead of like starting with the wheels and adding on the body of the car and ending with a car, and so step 4 is like the first time you have a car that works that you can try out. In Agile, we think of development a little bit different, where first we start with a skateboard, and we can get on the skateboard, we can ride it. Then we turn it into a scooter, and eventually we build ourselves up to the car, which is like the final product that is kind of maybe what we envisioned in the beginning. And when you do that, it's really beneficial for your development, because if you just build a car and you don't try it until the end, then when things maybe aren't the way that, things need to be changed, it's not quite the way that you expected it to be now that you try it out, because there's a lot of things you really can't know until you get users to try the software and see how it works. It's now much harder to make changes. You've got a full car, like you gotta get a car mechanic on that. Whereas if you start small and build something complete at each stage, and incrementally add on functionality, then you're going to be able to be much more adaptable, and that's kind of, I think, where the word agile comes from. It's a much more agile way of working. And you can catch things early on that might, be big changes, but they're not going to be as hard to implement when you catch them at the scooter stage versus the car stage. So that's a really great way of thinking about software development, both in Suits and wherever you end up doing software development in your futures. And yeah, there's kind of some principles on the slide, which I think I have conveyed. And the key thing with Agile is, you want to break your work down into sprints and decide, like, this is the functionality that we're going to get done for this sprint, and once it's done, then you stop and you test the thing and you use the thing, and then you plan for the next sprint. So that's kind of how Agile works. You're not even planning the entire project from the beginning, you're planning it in chunks. And that brings us into time management. So time management in software engineering is always tricky because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that can go sideways, and you're never going to end up exactly on schedule the way that you imagined it to be. So the key thing is to really plan for uncertainty. Agile can help with that a lot. And it's good to have a schedule. Like, I'm not advocating against having a schedule. And scheduling different sprints is great. Planning, like, this is the work that we're going to get done roughly in each sprint, and we can reevaluate that once each sprint is completed. You can create like a Gantt chart, like is pictured here, or other schedules, as long as, keep it flexible. Whenever you fall behind, if you're really not making the progress that you were hoping you would be making, then it's always good to go back to that prioritization and say, what are the things that we really need to get done, and what can we zero in our focus on that's going to create the best product and the most complete thing that we can bring to this competition or collaboration. And Finally, like in your schedule, always leave time for unknowns, for testing and bug fixing and all the things that will come up. Never schedule things so back to back that you expect to be developing all the way to the end, because you really do need that time to make sure that this thing is working and do testing after any change, no matter how small. I have so many stories of like from suits of us being like, oh, we'll just make this very small change and then we're gonna not test it and it's gonna be fine. And no, it's never fine. It's never fine. Okay. Outreach. So, some tips for planning outreach for your team. There's lots of different ways that you can do this, and you can kind of get creative with it. What our team did a lot was we just looked for existing events and engagements that were happening that we could kind of piggyback onto. Locally, there were like STEM nights at local schools, so we ended up going to those STEM nights and having a little booth where we would engage with the kids at those schools and tell them about what we were doing and give them demos. Things that your university is, events that your university is having and sponsoring are great. We did a bunch of those as well. Even like radio and TV, and all those local things are really great. Then there's less work for you to do as far as like recruiting people to come to you, because it's plenty of work to like figure out the engagement itself and the activity. So it's great if you can find something that already kind of has an audience. So that's what I recommend for outreach. Another thing about outreach is it's really great to use outreach for testing. That's what we ended up doing a lot at Boise State, is whenever we had a big outreach event where we knew a lot of people were going to be coming through, we would set up events where we told people like, come try our software, and we would use that to help us see how well it was working and identify some areas that we do some early testing before the NASA people get their hands on it. So we were more prepared for test week. And that gets us into user research. So this is something that I definitely recommend you do as a team. It's really easy to let it slip through the cracks because development gets so busy. But the earlier you can get people using your software and the more often you can get people to do it, the better it's going to be. Because as a developer, you just never know. Like we make assumptions about how people are going to use our software, but they're never all the way right. We got to see people use it, and we got to see what works and what doesn't. And so I recommend as early as you have something that people can try, have people try it. And these can be formal and informal engagements. I think I have some slides about that a little bit later. But just some general user research guidelines. First of all, ask open-ended questions. If you ask closed questions, like for example, like yes or no questions, like did you like this experience? You're sort of biasing the user towards saying a certain thing. Like if you ask them if they liked it, they have to say no. It's a little bit more uncomfortable to like give their real feelings if they didn't like it. On the other hand, if you just say something super broad and open-ended, like tell me about your experience with this application, that gives them a little bit more leeway to really talk about what's top of mind for them and hopefully get some more honest and insightful opinions from them. It's also great to think about the goals of your study before you do it, so you can kind of center your questions around those goals. Are you trying to kind of validate the end-to-end flow? Is there particular things that you really want to dial in on and ask people about? What are the actions that you imagine you're going to take after this user research? That's all great stuff to think about ahead of time. It's great to, in the user research, like give the user a task instead of just having them kind of play around with your software. This is EVA software, so give them some kind of like EVA simulation task. It doesn't have to be fancy, it can just be some random series of steps that they need to go through and use the software to help guide them. But the more realistic you make the situation, the better insights you're going to get. And then also make sure you have a large variety of testers from different backgrounds. If you just test with college students, you're going to miss the perspectives of people who are in a different place in life. Often, if you just test with like a young age group, you're going to miss the perspectives of people who aren't as familiar with the kinds of technologies that we use all the time. So stuff like that. As many different people as you can get to test is great. And then the do nots, I think, we address closed questions. Don't assume that the user understands what's going on, and don't tell them what to do. It's best, let them get stuck. If they're getting stuck with your software, that's important for you to know. And don't let them, if it's clear that they're stuck and they're not going to get to the next step without you, that's fine. You can kind of guide them along the way, but don't preempt that. Make sure that you're really watching them instead of trying to guide them through the process. And that's hard because it's hard to watch people struggle with your software, and you want to move things along, but don't do that. And don't get defensive either. You're going to get negative feedback sometimes, and you want to make people comfortable giving negative feedback because to an extent, respectful feedback, but those issues and the problems that people are having are really going to give you the most insights, and you want to make people comfortable to tell you about those things. So structured studies, I'll move my little face over here. Structured studies are a great thing to do, where you kind of come up with a repeatable task that you're going to have multiple people go through, and look at, after the study, kind of look at all the data together and try and draw some broader conclusions based on that. We try to do this at least once a year at Boise State, and we always learned a ton from doing this. If we could have done it more than that, I would have. So these are just some tips on what to do for structured studies. Give your participants a task to complete and kind of have that planned ahead of time. Ask the participants to talk through their thought process. That's really important because sometimes you can't always tell why didn't they find the button that I'm expecting them to press, or why'd they do that thing. So asking them to talk through their process and prompting them and reminding them to talk can really help. Again, we already talked about this. Resist the temptation to help them. You want to see what they would do without your help, because you're not going to be there when your real users are using it. It's also think about different environments to test in: light, dark, outside, inside, and especially think about trying an environment that's going to be close to the environment that you'll be testing in Houston. If you can get permission to record the session, that's great, because then you can go back and you don't have to remember everything, because you're never going to remember everything from a session. You can also take notes if you're not able to record it. And then it also is great to follow up with a short survey or interview after the task, so you can have your test subject kind of reflect on the experience that they had, and that can give you some more high-level ideas about kind of what's working well and what's not working well. And again, for those surveys and interviews, you want to ask open-ended questions and not lead the user into particular answers. And then with these studies, follow-up is also really important. It's easy for all the learnings to kind of fall through the cracks. So I always recommend, as soon as the study is done, just make a list of things that you're going to do. And they can be low priority things, give some stuff a P4 if you need to, but make sure it's recorded, because otherwise it's unlikely to be acted upon in the future. And then you don't always have to put together a structured study to get these kinds of insights. You can also just do casual demos, and you can learn a lot from that. When we went to some STEM nights and outreach events, we would often just bring the HoloLens and have people try it out. And in that case, we didn't have them doing the same task all the time, or we didn't have surveys, but we learned a lot still just from watching people use the software. So that can be really great. And it's also just great for outreach. Like if people can try your software, they're gonna get that much more excited about what you're doing and about STEM, and that's all great. And it's also good practice for explaining your tool, and you'll have to do that kind of demo, uh, those kinds of demos in Houston as well, and in your future career. It's always great to have those skills to explain what you've built and to present it. All right, and this reaches the end of my content. Sadly, I am not with you in person, so I cannot answer questions in person. However, like I mentioned before, feel free to message me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk about suits or career stuff or tech industry, whatever you want to talk about. I'm not that scary, hopefully. And I just wish you the best of luck with your suits journey this year. Savor it, take advantage of it. It's one of my favorite things that I ever did, and you can just get so much out of it. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. So I wish you all the best of luck. I hope this has been helpful, and again, feel free to reach out. Thanks. Bye.